Okay. All right, kids. So now as you probably have seen, last night, Gerald Nadler, who is the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, has publicly stated that we are in a state of constitutional crisis now. It's not just like anybody else having said it. He is the head of the Judiciary Committee that has the sole constitutional authority to impeach the president. He has had the vote in the Judiciary Committee to hold William Barr in contempt of court for two things: for refusing to show up and answer questions, and secondly, for refusing to produce the unredacted Mueller report for the Congress. And in response to all of that, in the preparation for holding them in contempt of court, it's just the Judiciary Committee has voted now to do that along a straight party line, which is unfortunate. So that there are 8 more Democrats on the House Judiciary Committee than Republicans, and they prevailed on the vote by 8 votes in the Judiciary Committee. So the response of Trump was that he has now exercised executive privilege over the unredacted Mueller report. And this is very analogous to Richard Nixon having asserted executive privilege over the tapes back in 1974, the Oval Office, White House tapes. And Nixon at that time, back in 1974, kept trying to offer lesser compliances with the subpoena. When they subpoenaed the tapes themselves, he said, "I'm going to write you a summary of the tapes." And they refused to accept that. And he said, therefore, he was exercising executive privilege over all of the tapes. And that went to the United States Supreme Court. And the United States Supreme Court ruled flat out that in a case where the House Judiciary Committee involved in potential impeachment hearings against the president have in fact subpoenaed specific items with regard to which the president is asserting executive privilege, that privilege has to fail. If there's reasonable grounds to believe that there's information in the subpoenaed materials that would substantially contribute to the Judiciary Committee being able to make a decision on that. And so that we have a direct analogy here, and the argument that's going to be made by William Barr as the Attorney General, acting on behalf of the executive branch and on behalf of President Trump, is going to be that they don't believe that there's anything additional in the report, in the unredacted portions, or in the evidentiary documents, the FBI 302s, the actual transcripts of interviews that we conducted, et cetera, that would substantially contribute to the ability of the Judiciary Committee and the House of Representatives to legislate. That's the key to this thing. As of right now, in light of the fact that there has been no official convening of impeachment hearings or impeachment procedures against President Trump, the authority under which the Judiciary Committee and, as of today, the Intelligence Committee, the authority under which they've subpoenaed these materials is just ostensibly toward its legislative function and its oversight function. They have not yet invoked the impeachment jurisdiction. And it was the impeachment jurisdiction that appears to have made all the difference in the Nixon case. That in light of the fact that it was a specific inquiry by the Judiciary Committee under their constitutional authority to impeach the president, that the potential conflict of interest that the president had in withholding the documents in the Nixon case caused the Supreme Court to rule in favor of the Congress. So what's happening here is that Trump and William Barr are basically pushing the Judiciary Committee and the House of Representatives further and further into having to impeach him or to initiate formal impeachment proceedings in order to get under the four corners of the ruling in the Nixon case. So that's going on right now, and since he has declared a constitutional crisis, Nadler, I was inclined to cite to you the famous observation that in Chinese, the Chinese symbol for a crisis is made up of two separate symbols, one meaning danger and the other meaning opportunity. Now, this is a fairly well-known quotation of John Kennedy made back in 1959 in a speech he delivered in Indianapolis. And it turns out it's not true, unfortunately. It would help us a lot here in the class if it were true, that I could just say, see, a crisis is both a danger and an opportunity, and let's have a discussion about what the dangers are and what the opportunities are here. But it turns out that Chinese scholars have assailed Kennedy's pithy observation. But let's set aside that and assume that this crisis, with or without the Chinese symbol for crisis, really constitutes both an extreme danger and an extreme opportunity. And one of the things I want to do today is I want to discuss with you what you think the dangers are and what you think the opportunities are that are presented by this crisis. And then I want to talk about your papers, about your little mini theses that you're going to be writing here that are due on the 16th. Now, am I correct that there's a strike being called for the 16th? So, okay, so we're obviously, who is it, how have they gone about calling for the strike? What type of organization, what type of voting process is there? What's it going? How's it going?
ASME was doing it. ASME is what's called.
The student association? Well, that does it then. Yeah, maybe, okay.
It's ASME, which is the service workers in broad different industries on campus, and it's across every UC campus.
Yeah.
On the 16th. And there are student organizations as well. The WISP is helping support it, and YDSA, multitude of others. Okay, well, let me ask this. How many of you are supporting the strike? Okay, so then we obviously won't have a class that day, or we can do something else that's supportive of the strike. but that's the day that your papers are due. So let's push that to the following Tuesday. For the papers are due, so you'll have extra time to do that and still be able to direct your attention to the substance of the strike. Okay? But still, I still want to talk about the subject matters. Now, we've given you a few potential prompts for the paper, but what I want to do is I want to try to craft your papers in dialogue with you here today a little more precisely, because I want to be able to ascertain what specific question each of you has that will engine you to the greatest extent to go digging in and finding out stuff in addition to what it is we've already talked about in class. Okay, and I want to say a few words prior to our getting into that discussion, the two discussions of the dangers and opportunities of an impeachment process, and then the substance of your papers. I just want to talk a little bit about this very well-known Steele dossier, because people have understandably turned their attention to the Mueller report, Volume 1 and Volume 2, even though, as we've talked about a lot in this class, there's a lot of waning interest that's been kind of choreographed around that volume 1 in the collusion, in conspiracy and cooperation and coordination issue. And there's a whole lot of focus on just the obstruction of volume 2. But people have turned to focus on these 2 volumes rather than the Steele dossier. And the Steele dossier, as you probably know, is a compilation of 16 memos that were prepared by a fellow named Christopher Steele. And Christopher Steele, for 20 years, was or eventually became, during his 20-year career, as part of MI6 in England. He was the Russia desk expert in British intelligence. And so that he's very familiar with the dynamics inside Russia. He has lots of sources inside Russia. And he is the one who prepared what they call this Steele dossier, which is really made up of these 16 2- to 4-page memos, and supplemented after the election in December by a 17th memo. Okay, so that's technically what they are. And there's been major efforts made on the part of the right wing, the Trump administration, Fox News, and the other people that are suggesting that this is an entire hoax. They are insistent that the proximate causation of the actual initiation of the investigation that evolved into the Mueller investigation was actually initiated by this dossier. And the other side, the Democratic Party, DNC, Clinton administration, et cetera, their position has been quite clearly, it wasn't initiated. The investigation wasn't initiated by the existence of this dossier. That there was an independent investigation that was initiated by Jack Brennan, actually, the head of the CIA. Now, for whatever, the reason that the Trump people want to be able to sell people on the notion that it was this dossier that initiated the FBI investigation, the counterintelligence investigation, is because they are attributing the dossier to a biased undertaking on behalf of the Democratic National Committee and the Clinton campaign. They're asserting that it was they that hired Steele to do this dossier, thereby implying that he had a bias in reviewing the information and sources that he had. Now, there's a technical, multiple-stepped defense against that accusation. One of the problems is that in the present-day American political world, any argument that takes more than a bumper sticker to put it forth is missed by people. They kind of get lost in a compound sentence. To say nothing of a compound, complex sentence. And in this particular case, what it is that happened is that this group that was hired to do the investigation that hired Steele, this group is called the Fusion Group. This Fusion Group had been hired initially. It's called Fusion GPS. And Fusion GPS is a company that was hired originally in 2015, prior to the actual formal beginning of the campaign process for the election in 2016. It was hired by this conservative group, the Washington Free Beacon. And this conservative group
was part of the never Trump element within the Republican Party and Republican Party people, just lay people, not necessarily the leadership, but that this conservative group, the Washington Free Beacon, it was a publication that was trying to gather negative information about all of the different Republican candidates, but primarily Trump, on behalf of the never Trump elements in the Republican Party. And they were in operation from October of 2015 all the way into June and July of 2016, at which point it became clear that it was likely that Trump was going to be the nominee of the Republican Party. At which point this Never Trump group withdrew their funding from the Fusion GPS and said, look, hey, we don't want any more investigation going on about this. Okay, now it's important to remember that at none of that time between October 2015 and July of 2016, when the Fusion GPS group was doing its investigation and developing opposition research on Trump primarily, at no time did Fusion GPS employ Christopher Steele. He was not involved in any of that. So the fact that GPS was actually originally investigating Trump for a Republican group that was a never Trump group isn't really salient to the issue of the bias or non-bias of Christopher Steele. But what happened is that after they would, well, actually before they withdrew, at the same time as Trump was becoming the more and more obvious nominee for the Republican Party, what happened is the law firm, the law firm that represented the Democratic National Committee and the Clinton campaign, what we call them the Cooey law firm. Let me see what their full name is here, but it's anyways, it's the Perkins Cooey. Perkins Cooey is a big, silk stocking, white shoe corporate law firm in Washington D.C. And Perkins Cooey did the legal work for both the Democratic National Committee and the Clinton campaign. And they, once it started becoming obvious to them that it was going to be Trump that was going to be the nominee, Perkins Cooey, on its own, as lawyers for the DNC and for the Clinton campaign, they decided to initiate investigations of Trump. And what happened is Fusion GPS actually went to the Perkins Cooey law firm and said, look, we've been doing a bunch of opposition research on Trump for all of this time. Would you like to hire us to continue doing it for your clients, the DNC and the Clinton campaign? And the Perkins Cooey law firm said yes, and ended up paying the Fusion GPS over $1 million to do this investigation of him. And it was the Fusion GPS company that reached out and hired another private company, to do the investigation, and they hired this Orbis Business Intelligence. They hired them to do the research, and it was Orbis that hired this fellow Christopher Steele. Okay, and so you've got 3 or 4 different steps being taken here, and it turns out that Steele
didn't even know who it was that was paying for this investigation. That all he had been told was that it was a Washington law firm. And the actual charge that he had, the actual sort of marching orders, if you will, that he had were, he says, why is Donald Trump repeatedly seeking to do deals in such a notoriously corrupt police state as Russia that has his most serious, that all serious investors shun? That was the general question that was assigned to Christopher Steele by Orbis, who had been hired by Fusion GPS, who in turn had been hired by Perkins Coie. And so that when push comes to pull, there's going to be a clear defense on the part of Christopher Steele about the charge that he was biased because he was doing opposition research against Trump for the Clinton campaign. Okay? But the problem is that when any lawyer will tell you, when it takes you 2 or 3 minutes to explain to somebody your defense, you're losing. And you're going to lose half of your jury. They're not going to be able to follow those steps. But the bottom line is there appears to be a genuine, good faith explanation that Steele did not know that he was working for the Democratic Party. But what he did is when he began this investigation to try to find out why it is that Trump was doing so much business or trying to do so much business with Russia, that he came across this information. And the primary information that he ran into caused him to believe that Russia was in a position to blackmail Trump because of a number of videos that they had of him. Not just the one that a lot of people snicker about the most in Moscow, of him having these prostitutes do this stuff in this one hotel room, but other videos they had of him over in St. Petersburg earlier, and he was concerned that the explanation for why Trump was doing so much business with the oligarchs and accepting money from the oligarchs that was being laundered through this bank in Crete, the Deutsche Bank, was because they had the goods on him. Now, that is not that convincing. And the reality is a person that's as sophisticated as Christopher Steele and has spent 20 years working in the intelligence field, to just think that, an entire Russian state is going to be able to blackmail a president because of his certain sexual activities, is not the most convincing thing in the field of intelligence. And so there was a second set of things that, remember, he was asked to find out why it was that Trump was engaging to such a large extent in doing business with Russia. And so that he then turned to look at what the business was that he was actually doing with Russia. Okay? And that's where he began to see that a substantial portion of the monies that were flowing to Trump to build various Trump towers and condominium towers, etc., were in fact coming originally from the Russian oligarchs, and that they deposit their money in the Deutsche Bank in the island of Crete, and then he would be given the loans by the Deutsche Bank when virtually no other banks were willing to give him loans because of his terrible history of refusing to pay his debts.
Could you explain why he wouldn't just get the money directly from the oligarchs? Like, why do they have to go through a bank to
Well-
make it more traceable? I guess?
Well, no, that's a good question. Because the oligarchs were using depositing their money in the bank to launder the money. They would put the money, if they just embezzled the money and gave it to Trump, then he's basically getting embezzled money. What they're doing is they're taking their embezzled money, depositing it in the Deutsche Bank, and then Deutsche Bank is loaning money levered by the deposits, theoretically other money, that is getting clean money to Trump. And then Trump, what he does is he builds the towers and then rents them out and gets millions and millions of dollars, pays back the loan to the Deutsche Bank, and then the Deutsche Bank has clean funds. They have clean funds in there, and he's gotten clean funds, and the oligarchs have had their money laundered. So that's the reason for this stepped process that Christopher Steele ran into. And so what that did is it provided a alternative, potentially a supplemental reason, but perhaps an alternative to the less convincing argument that he was simply being blackmailed by Russia over these sex tapes. And so that was the original fallback position in the Steele dossier, is that it's possible that Trump had, instead of being blackmailed by the Russians, was in a sense beholden to them because of them being the primary source of the funding that he was getting, because he was being denied funding by Western banks. But then there is a third item in here, and he just touched upon it vaguely. He touched upon this question of the sale of the Russian oil and gas company, because he'd run into this fellow, Carter Page, and that Carter Page had suddenly appeared as a member of the Foreign Intelligence Advisory Committee for Trump. And so that if, in fact, Trump had not put him on his Foreign Intelligence Advisory Committee, there might not have been any suspicion there to begin with. Now, what this does is it throws into some question the primary defense that's being made by the DNC and the Clinton administration that, oh, it wasn't the dossier that initiated the counterintelligence investigation by the FBI, it was Jack Brennan. And Jack Brennan and the CIA had somehow come into possession of information that led them to begin a counterintelligence investigation focusing on Carter Page. Okay, so the fact that there is this coincident identification by Steele in his dossier of Carter Page being on the Foreign Intelligence Advisory Committee for Trump, and him having meetings with this Igor guy, who was the CEO of the Russian oil and gas company, and that there was this mysterious sale that was going on of 19.5% of the Russian oil company, and that here is Carter Page meeting with Igor and coming right back into the United States and meeting with the Trump people. Yes?
Do you know if this was before or after Exxon and Rosneft had started doing testing in the Arctic for oil and gas?
No, this was after. This was after. Yeah, this intended sale of the 20%, 19.5% of this was after they had entered into this drilling contract with Exxon, and so that there was this huge potential in the offing coming in here, and so that they were in a position to lever the sale of 20% of it. Now, so this is where it starts. The suspicions that you've heard me talk about here of the potential involvement of Trump himself and Putin as potential partners in this venture
had to do with this sale of this 19.5% of the interest in the company. And it was never really followed up on in the Steele dossier. He sort of just brushed against it as sort of a third area over and above the sex tape blackmail thing, the loans with regard to the undue, I guess, dependence of Trump on that source of funding and becoming beholden, not blackmailed, but beholden to these oligarchs. This third option of there being this peculiar thing going on is all that really the dossier hinted at, that there was some other weird thing going on and they couldn't quite figure it out. And it's interesting because the coincidence of Jack Brennan beginning his investigation, his counterintelligence investigation, coming from the CIA, is not entirely convincing that it was completely independent of the Steele dossier. Because the argument that, oh, see, these are two completely independent things is predicated upon the fact that the CIA investigation that engaged the NSA and engaged the FBI counterintelligence division, it is predicated upon the fact that the dossier wasn't made public until 2 months after the CIA investigation was begun. But that doesn't mean that the CIA didn't know about it. You know, in fact, there were all kinds of people that knew about it running around inside Washington. In fact, there had been a gathering of national security reporters that gathered together to talk about this dossier that everybody rumored was floating around somewhere. And so that the question about whether or not Jack Brennan initiated this national security state investigation because he heard about the dossier is something they're going to have to deal with down the road, okay? Because what you see happening now is some of the right-wing senators in the Republican Party in the U.S. Senate are seizing upon this and insisting upon playing out this kind of simple theory that the entire investigation was initiated by the Steele dossier. And some of the sources of Christopher Steele were Russian intelligence people. And so they've actually gone so far as to say out loud that the real conspiracy with Russian intelligence was being undertaken by the DNC and the Clinton campaign. And so that there, as I said, you know, I'm rubber and you're glue thing. You know, that, oh no, it was you guys that were conspiring with the Russians to get intelligence information. And so that the reason I raise this thing about the Steele dossier is because it's, well, I discovered that there's a couple guys that I know pretty well that were involved in getting copies of the Steele dossier. One of them was a guy named Jonathan Weiner. I'll tell you a story about Jonathan Weiner. And the other one was David Korn. And David Korn is a person who ended up, after I knew him, becoming a rather constant reporter for Mother Jones. And then he became the Washington bureau chief for Mother Jones magazine. And Jonathan Weiner was the legal counsel for John Kerry in John Kerry's Senate staff. But both of these guys ended up being given copies of the dossier, the original 16 memos, directly by Christopher Steele. And so the bottom line, the question is if Jonathan Weiner had these memos and David Korn had these memos, how could one possibly assume that the CIA didn't have them? And that wouldn't have been what really initiated the investigation. Okay? Yes?
Is Christopher Steele just working out of like his own office or something? I mean, like, where is he?
He has his own business in London. He has an private intelligence, business intelligence office. And, you know, no, he's in London. He's in London. Okay, and what he did is when Steele started getting this information from his various sources, Russian sources, intelligence sources from different places, he got so concerned about the blackmail aspect of this that he brought, he called a guy in the FBI who was assigned to the Rome embassy in Europe, and went to see him and told him about this potential blackmail information. And that person working under the cover of the State Department, who was a real FBI guy, was the head of the European and Eurasian organized crime strike force for the FBI. And so the approach that was made by Steele to this particular guy was under the guise of it being like an organized crime blackmail conspiracy against Trump. So he brought it to him, not to the counterintelligence division, for whatever value that has, and it has some. So that the actual investigation that was initiated by Jack Brennan was initiated in the counterintelligence division of FBI. And so the people inside Washington, I discover after spending 20 years there, are a lot more impressed by the distinctions between one department and another department of the FBI than lay people are. They're saying, you know, what are you kidding? You know, it's your left hand doesn't know what your right hand is doing. Well, that's true, as it turns out, a lot of times in Washington, D.C. But I don't find it that credible, actually. But the bottom line is, you know, whether it was the reference in the Steele dossier to these three different elements that generated the investigation, the counterintelligence investigation, the fact that the counterintelligence investigation's first action, the Jack Brennan investigation inside the counterintelligence division of the FBI, the fact that their first overt act in their investigation was to get a FISA warrant, you know, against Carter Page, is very important here, because the reference in the Steele dossier to Carter Page all had to do with this mysterious oil deal that was going on and the potential involvement of Trump and his people in that. And yet, you don't see that surface anywhere. You don't see it rise to the top of the list in the Steele dossier. You don't see it rise to the top of the list with the FBI Eurasian Organized Crime Strike Force investigation, and you don't see it rise to the top even in the counterintelligence investigation. What they do is they start going for Trump's business activities. Okay, they go to the second one, the second item in the Steele dossier. They start going after his business activities with the oligarchs, because the Central Intelligence Agency views the oligarchs as basically synonymous with Putin, because they view Putin to be a criminal. And that's a very unsophisticated analysis, if I say so myself, of the Central Intelligence Agency. Putin is a lot more than a common criminal, you know, and it might make it easier for them to try to sell that image to the American people. But they ought to be more sophisticated themselves to not fall for that, you know, drinking their own Kool-Aid. You know, I mean, the bottom line is that Putin is a part of it's not that he's not embezzling billions of dollars. I mean, don't get me wrong. You know, you don't get to have $93 billion because you're just the head of Russia, you know. But the bottom line is that Putin is using, I've mentioned to you before, some not insignificant portion of the money that he's embezzling in rebuilding all of the Russian Orthodox churches in Russia, in building up that entire infrastructure of Mother Russia again. having accepted the spinning off of all of the, quote, ethnic provinces of the Soviet Union. And so he's into a much more sophisticated game. He's involved in a chess game, you know, against the CIA that may well be still playing checkers against him, you know, and just making simple moves and seeing whether he's a criminal and whether he's embezzling money and all of that. Whereas he's involved in this much more sophisticated program, and his relationship with the oligarchs in Russia is just a simple necessity. You know, if he's going to remain in power in Russia and become the new divinely ordained czar of Russia by the Russian Orthodox Church, he's got to have the cooperation of the oligarchs. And so this big play that's going on right now is, and I want us, again, I want us to continue to follow what's going on here, because remember, the fundamental potential rationale behind what Trump is doing, if it's not simple corruption on his part and simple corruption on Putin's part, to potentially be partners in this intertrust group that is one of the secret beneficiaries of this 19.5% interest in the Russian oil company. If they're engaged in a more sophisticated operation, it could well be the effort to monopolize all of the oil in the world and isolate China from getting access to it. And that harkens all the way back to that second iteration of the 1992 United States Defense Department Policy Planning Guidance document that I told you about, that was generated at the very end of the Cold War, back in January of 1992. Well, actually, it was generated after April, the second iteration. But what I'm saying is that there is a major game of Go being played here by China. Russia is playing chess. The Central Intelligence Agency and Jack Brennan and the people may be playing checkers. And it may well be that Trump is basically playing marbles. You know, it doesn't even know what he's doing. And just kind of looking to see how he can get as much money as he can, and figuring, you know, even if he only has one term, he's ingratiating himself to Russia, and he's going to get the Trump Tower built, and he's going to get, you know, and he's going to have a, you know, a partnership interest in potentially a $10 trillion operation with the oil. So you see that there are different levels of consciousness going on involved in what's happening here. And what you see this morning, I'm just going to alert you for something that might happen tomorrow. Okay, that Trump this morning, while Nadler is going around on MSNBC and all these other places declaring this state of constitutional crisis that we're all in right now, Trump is holding a press conference announcing his plans to potentially impose an additional 25% tariff on China, right? To try to force them to the table to make concessions to the U.S. It's just this hammer-handed treatment of China, basically ignoring the fact that we're in debt up to our chin to China, you know, because of the imbalanced trade stuff that he keeps whining about. And I've been talking with some people who are indicating that China is getting ready tomorrow afternoon to withdraw from all of the trade negotiations with the United States because of Trump being such a complete heavy-handed moron. And that they're going to turn and focus on establishing a new alliance with Russia and having them be their major trading partners, potentially getting access to this Russian oil. And at the same time, if that doesn't work out, they're in the process of building this gigantic company
that is going to be making 3 million electric cars every year to sell at rock bottom prices to everybody all around the world, to completely undermine the petroleum businesses. Okay, because it'll be not only automobile or regular passenger cars and stuff, but trucks and all kinds of other vehicles that are all electric. And so the reason I raise this to you is because I want you to understand that in doing the simple assignments that I've asked you to do, the reading of the summaries of the 2 volumes, the looking at that Spygate thing, and be following the things that we're talking about here, is because I want you to be able to have the basic information and knowledge that you need to have to follow the more sophisticated arguments about what's going on here. Okay, as I say, you have to be able to walk before you can run. And you need to be able to know how to play chopsticks on the piano before you can play Mozart. And there's a very sophisticated phenomenon going on here. And it's not clear what is understood about this on the part of, for example, someone as wonderful as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And the people that are saying, let's impeach this guy. Let's just run him out of office here. Let's get rid of this guy. And they come pouring it on. And for example, the argument is being made, not unconvincingly, as you've made it yourself here, is that, to impeach this guy, right, it's going to take as long to get him impeached as it would to get him unelected. And so, but if you impeach him, it's going to make all of his opponents, his support people, go crazy. It's going to have him playing the victim here. And yet other people are doing it simply as a matter of principle. I shouldn't say simply as a matter of principle, but as a matter of principle, including all the way up to Lawrence Tribe. The principal American constitutional scholar in the world, and other constitutional historians are all saying that if the House Judiciary Committee, under the control of the Democratic Party, doesn't exercise its constitutional duty to impeach this guy for all the things that he's doing here, they're going to establish such a horrific precedent for other presidents to be able to get away with what they might want to do. And on the other hand, the Nancy Pelosi's and the Chuck Schumers are making the argument on the other side, is that, look, this is really risky. By impeaching him as a matter of principle, you actually make it harder potentially for us to defeat him in the election. Because he's going to stir up all of his base. He's going to be playing the victim all the time. And the bottom line is that's going to give him a better chance to win than if we just sort of roll out one investigation after another here, tarring him up and raising fundamental questions about his ethics and his respect for law, and giving him more and more opportunities to lie to people. And after all, the Democratic Party did win 3 million more votes than he did last time. But it was just a matter of like 70,000 votes in these 3 states. Okay? So what I'm saying here is that I don't want it to be too much information, but what I'm saying is that we need to evaluate whether or not, this is the bottom line, whether or not it's possible to have one of the principal articles of impeachment be Trump's position on global climate change. Because to be at a time in history when a person comes into office and starts decimating all of the environmental protection standards and in ordering, violating the Administrative Procedures Act and all constitutional principles, ordering these pipelines to go on through public parklands and Native American lands and opening up the seacoast for drilling and all that kind of stuff, right in the face of a clear resolution on the part of 193 nations at the Paris Peace Accords in December of 2015, that they acknowledge that global climate change is a huge threat to the human family,
and that we've got to seriously reduce the amount of fossil fuels that we burn. And here's this guy, you know, increasing the amounts of global greenhouse gas emissions willfully and defiantly, and in fact, they're not even discussing impeaching him for that. They've got to go over into all this other stuff because they're all trapped in these internal ideas about, oh, he defied the FBI, he wouldn't talk to the FBI, he wouldn't turn over the documents, he wouldn't testify. You know, I mean, there are all these kind of technical things. It's like trying to, you know, indict Al Capone for income tax evasion. You know, here he is gunning people down in the streets and you can't get at him. Why is that? You know, and so that what I would like us to be able to do is to turn our attention to trying to figure out in this course what the connections are between a potential impeachable offense and global climate change. The reason being that we can then mobilize the same amount of people in the country that are concerned or afraid about global climate change to understand they need to get him out of office for that reason. Okay, just like they said that, you know, one of the major reasons why it was possible to successfully impeach and convict Richard Nixon was because of the huge lack of support for him because of the Vietnam War. That whole long process of organizing people against the Vietnam War came to full fruition basically by getting him impeached and removed. Okay, and getting Jimmy Carter basically brought in. Okay, so that's the reason that I'm raising these things for you. And so that having been said about the Steele dossier, what I would like to do is I would like to address the second issue, and that is that even though this crisis doesn't in fact manifest itself in a Chinese symbol that says it's both danger and opportunity, but let's take a look at the dangers that I've raised some of them. The danger of impeaching him, the first and most obvious one we've talked about, is the fact that it may stir up his base, mobilize his base, and given the fact that it's likely that he would be acquitted in the Senate, it would give him an opportunity to say, see, I've been completely exonerated by the Senate. I've been found not guilty. And therefore, the Democrats are abusing the entire system of law by, first of all, having the whole Mueller investigation that basically, in his words, deprived me of my whole first 2 years in office. You know, therefore entitling me to an additional term. Okay? Okay, that's his position. But they've gone so far as to invoke the impeachment process of tying up the United States Congress to keep us from doing the things we need to do to help the American people. You know, like build the infrastructure and stuff, which he isn't in favor of doing anyhow. You know, so that this is the more obvious danger, but what I'd like to ask you to do is think about what are some of the other dangers involved in impeaching him, if in fact the likelihood is that he's going to be acquitted by the Senate.
I mean, like, his supporters could probably frame it as a way, if you don't like a president's foreign policy, you're just going to go ahead and try and impeach him. Because Trump may try to play it off that his dealings with Russia is all just part of maybe an aggressive economic foreign policy.
Yeah.
The Democrats aren't very fond.
And therefore, they would attempt to impeach the next Democratic president.
If they don't like
with the same precedent. Therefore, that the common law practice had been established that in light of the fact that you don't have the evidence to get him convicted and you're going to use the impeachment process against him anyhow, it's just because you don't like his foreign policy, that's going to establish a standard where they're going to do it. And therefore, it would end up destabilizing the American executive branch. Right? That's another problem. So what other fundamental dangers do you think that there are?
I think really depends on the reasoning that they impeached for. And if they base it off of this notion that he's essentially lied to the FBI, this kind of stuff, along those guidelines, then we're going to see, well, as all impeachments are, it's a shift in power. And we're going to see that shift in power go to the security state and further entrench us in a system of surveillance and a system of control from the judicial branch.
That's the big one. That's the other big one. And you're correct in yours. That's the other big one. That in fact, if they succeed in getting him impeached, even if he's not convicted, that what's going to happen is that people are going to start relying more and more as the good guys, Jack Brennan, the FBI, Comey, you know, the assistant FBI, you know, and the others, that the people are unknowingly or unwittingly backing up into a national security state. Because the type of tactics that are being used by the opponents of Trump, because they're so offended by him, and there is such a groundswell of opposition to him on the part of basically everybody who reads more than 2 books a year in the country, you know, that they're all feeling they're playing kind of loosey-goosey here with the rules, and that they're even going to the point of breaking down the doors of his lawyer's office and dragging him in and making the lawyer testify about the most confidential conversations that they had as the lawyer. You know, so they're undermining the attorney-client privilege, and very clearly they are seriously undermining the executive privilege of the president. I mean, they've got people right now jumping up and down, marching in the streets because Trump doesn't want to reveal to the CIA and the State Department what his conversations are with another head of state. I mean, it's absolutely clear that the president has the right, he's got the explicit right under the Constitution to establish treaties. And so he has a complete right. I mean, that's like saying that, you know, Roosevelt, you know, when he was talking to Churchill, that he had to have the State Department people sitting around taking notes so that everybody would know what he was saying. You know, I mean, that is just not true. That was never understood as being a limitation on the power of the president. That somehow these national security state agencies all had to be informed about what he was doing, and that he had to take his direction from them, that he wasn't entitled to actually come up with his own ideas. He had to do what the bureaucracy basically wanted him to do. Now, the fact that we don't like what he's doing, and we think that what he's doing is kind of nutty, is a factor here. But for the Democratic Party and the progressive community and the liberal community, and even now more and more people in the moderate community, to be making these kind of broadside assertions about the authority of the CIA and the State Department and everybody else, you know, I mean, that this is a dangerous undertaking here that Grant has put his finger on. That this empowering of the national security state bureaucracies and the diminution of the authority of the president, who is actually the person that pre-existed the intelligence communities that were created theoretically to assist the president in his foreign policy activities.
But at the same time, though, like, if we don't act upon this constitutional crisis of him, like, not letting the legislative branch do its constitutional duty, then we face another egregious, like, overstepping of power from the executive. So this seems like right now, like, the 3 branches of government are really kind of like pulling at each other for control.
Yeah, and I guess one might argue, such as us, I mean, at the Jesuit headquarters for 10 years, and for the head of the Christic Institute for 20 years, and the head of the Romero Institute now for another 15 years, you know, I'm a great believer in taking power away from the executive, taking power away from the Central Intelligence Agency, not authorizing them to engage in covert operations like this. You know, and so that what we're seeing here is this peculiar enlistment of people in the progressive community that are basically supporting activities that we feel inclined to champion. You know, we feel inclined to say, Brennan, go get this guy. You know, get this guy out of here. He's a nutcase. You know, here, Comey. I mean, Comey, hey, Comey's basically kind of a decent guy. Let's all go cheering for Comey, who did this horrendous thing to Hillary Clinton on the eve of the election, coming out and announcing that he was reopening the investigation against her. And there was a lot of new evidence that we had to look into. There's a whole other bunch of emails that we hadn't seen before. You know, I mean, and so that what's happening now is that the worst, well, some people would say the worst of all possible worlds is that what's happening is chaos is being sowed here. The normal partnerships and the normal adversaries are all getting mushed together here. And so that you've got a genuine crisis on your hands here, because the systems that have been put in place to try to have things run smoothly are all now being knocked up into the air and blown up here. And that is what is being asserted Russia is up to. That what Russia is doing is basically fragging us. As they say, it's an old term from the Vietnam War. They're basically rolling grenades into our political tent and blowing up the normal procedures. Now, there is a very specific progressive argument that that's great, because look what they were doing before. So that, like, if in fact Hillary Clinton had been elected, she would have continued to try to encircle Russia and put missiles into all of the republics and make them all part of NATO, and be jamming, you know, the tail of Russia like mad. You know, meeting with, you know, Goldman Sachs and you know, and putting people from Goldman Sachs in charge of the economy after they'd already blown it in 2008. You know, she'd be, you know, rattling rockets, you know, at Iran, you know, and so that this argument, and these are things that I'm throwing out because I'm going to talk with you about your paper topics here, because, you know, I don't want you to just, you know, undertake some kind of simple, as I said, regurgitation of one or another things that we've talked about, but to think about these things, you know, that that this progressive argument that the United States, you know, since the end of the Cold War, since Gorbachev came forward and agreed to step back away from the long 75-year Cold War and to begin to unilaterally disassemble the warheads of the Soviet Union. In the United States, Defense Department comes rushing forward with that first draft of the 1992 United States Defense Department Policy Planning Guidance document, calling for a dramatic increase in the U.S. military budget and to be able to establish full spectrum dominance over the entire world for the purpose of maintaining our continued privileged access to the natural resources of the world that we wanted to have for our corporations. You know, I mean, that's what this progressive argument is, that's what we were up to. And left undisturbed, that's what we would have continued doing. Okay, and so now, even though he isn't doing it with any kind of insight, you know, Trump is basically throwing all of that up in the air. And he's basically disrupting numerous systems that have been in place that all redounded to the imperial benefit of the United States, in the ruling class in the United States. That we were going along at this kind of petty pace of, you know, allowing more black people into the elite circles, you know, allowing more and more Hispanic people to come in immigration to work in our fields and pick our strawberries, you know, and that all of that stuff. And that's going to be the basic theme of Joe Biden's campaign. Let's get back to normal. let's get back to normal. And let's not make the reckless mistake on the part of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party of criticizing normal. Because look what the alternative is here. The alternative is chaos. And the alternative is having morons like Trump get elected. So let's all band together, let's all get behind Joe Biden, and let's get back to normal. That's going to be their pitch, okay? And so that this crisis that has been identified by Jerry Nadler is more than just a confrontation between the Congress and the executive branch. Because the Congress has been going along for 75 years with giving more and more power to the executive branch. Because the executive branch has been very instrumental in achieving the imperial ambitions of the major corporations in the country. And now that they've just taken the extra step of stepping over into having the United States Supreme Court authorize the direct funding of our elections by corporations, you know, they're all, you know, the Democrats and Republicans the Democrats weren't terribly upset about that because they're getting almost as much money from the corporations as the Republicans are, you know, and so that we're at a state here where I want to enlist your intellectual capacities to start thinking about what's going on here. You know, and all of this is in the context of global climate change. Here are 2,500 scientists from around the world telling us every single week about how things are worse than they thought the week before. And that we're having chaos getting ready to descend upon us. And what's happening is the structures of the American government are being weakened. The degree of trust on the part of the electorate for our elected representatives is going down and down. The trust that the people inside the Congress have for each other is going down and down. The ability to coordinate between the executive branch and the legislative branch is going down to almost zero. And all of this is in the face of a looming catastrophe that's on its way to attack us. Okay?
So let's do opportunity now then. We go.
Yeah. Okay. So let me get another. We'll cheer up over the. What other potential danger? Before we're going to turn to the opportunities here. What are the other major dangers that people aren't really seeing here?
I can see the danger of people losing more confidence in our government type of thing, where it's just like, look at this, look what's happening now. It's like it's a shit show type of thing. You know? And that's I feel like that's a problem. One of the main problems in like with the government type of thing is that a lot of people don't believe in it anymore. It's just like, you know what? It's just
right. That's the other big one. Yeah, the American people will lose confidence in the legitimacy of the entire democratic enterprise. That's, I mean, with everything said about the imperial activities of the United States and the racist stuff in their government and everything else, the fact is that there's an extraordinary concept here in North America where they're pretending, at least, and teaching people in their public schools the importance of democratic processes to the point where there is a possibility, and this is where we're getting to the opportunities here, of having genuine democracy and genuine representative democracy with representatives that you can trust, etc. But if in fact the people see this type of a display going on, that they're very likely to lose all confidence in their representatives. And that it will infect not only the national government, but state governments, local governments, and everything. Everybody will assume they're all a bunch of incompetents mentists, you know, or crooks or criminals or self-dealing people. you know, and that they don't have any good faith interest in the public interest, you know, and so that's the third big danger that's here that each of you have discerned here. Now let's shift over and take a look at what opportunity there is here in this particular crisis. So what is the first major obvious opportunity that exists here because of this crisis? Come on, King, let's be optimistic here.
Kind of the destruction of the old order and way of doing things presents the opportunity to start a new order.
The destruction of the old order, okay? The destruction of the old order that is imperialist, is racist, is misogynist, homophobic, you know, and you can go on, and capitalist, dare we say, you know, and unjust in profound ways, okay? And that all of the efforts that have been being made at these kind of incremental fixes to the system have been demonstrated over and over and over again not to be sufficient. Even unto the fact that you can't rein in the oil corporations that are killing the world. You know, the particular system that we've got put together here is incapable of stopping them. Okay? So that's a very big one. And what is the flip side of the destruction of the old order? It is the potential for a genuine progressive order to ascend into place. And that you've got somebody, for example, like Bernie Sanders, that's been in the House of Representatives and in the United States Senate for decades, you know, elucidating these different proffers that he has made of different kinds of programs that could be done, you know, that are not that revolutionary, even though he refers to it as our revolution, you know, to actually expand the public education from beyond 12 years in the high school into an additional 2 years to get an associate degree, or an additional 4 years to get a college degree, you know, and to open up the graduate schools for people independent of the wealth of their parents, you know, is an extraordinary opportunity for democracy itself. Because it is true, in order to really help run a democracy, you need to have a modicum of education, a modicum of ability to write and communicate, to research things and look through information and call out what's important, you know, and even to maintain a representative democracy. That was the part that Hamilton kept insisting that it's only these representatives that need to govern. You can't really have the great unwashed participating directly in decision making. You have to have this elite set of representatives. You know, the fact is, it's possible to have genuine representatives who represent the constituency of their people and who listen to their people and who play an important leadership role that can help educate their constituents who don't have enough time to spend paying attention to this. Now with the access to all of the new streaming videos and everything, you know, a representative could spend a lot more time adequately educating her or his constituents about issues and soliciting their position on how they ought to vote on things with the new technology that's available and this body blow potentially to the old order. It presents a golden opportunity for a responsible, progressive community to rise up into the fore here. And that we do see some of that happening. And we saw it happening even in the 2016 election, in the primary campaign with Bernie Sanders. And now we see even though they're not aware of it right yet, we see, you know, 20 plus Democratic Party leaders, you know, pushing themselves forward as potential leadership in this new, more progressive incarnation of our country. And if they could only get together and make a decision, for example, who's going to be president, who's going to be vice president, who's going to be secretary of the treasury, who's going to be secretary of defense, what does our budget look like, what is our environmental law going to be, what kind of a Green New Deal, if any, are we going to have. If they would step back from confronting each other and trying to pull each other down, which they haven't gotten into too much yet, but if they can refrain from pulling each other down from the pedestal in order to try to pull themselves up, and can join in coalition to take advantage not only of this extraordinary crisis constitutionally, but to address this incredible crisis environmentally that they all acknowledge is coming down on us now. If they could say, look at new rules, right? New rules, you know, we don't fight each other. We all join together and form a new administration so that we're the government in waiting. We're the government in waiting. And this is what it looks like, and this is what our budget looks like, and this is what our cabinet members look like. That's the kind of opportunity that we have here that is being presented by this particular crisis. So it's not just the tumbling of the old order that is highly potentiated here, but it's the rising into the fore of a genuinely responsible, progressive alternative.
Yeah, that sounds nice, but like, I mean, just the polling shows that Joe Biden is in the lead. I mean, it might be too early to make any conclusions about that, but I mean, that's pretty, that's not something you probably want to see if you are.
Well, it's interesting because what he's saying is that isn't it disheartening, you know, in light of this great opportunity that you have somebody like Joe Biden who's such a representative of the old order, as it were, even if it's the more moderate wing of the old order, in the lead. You know, I think, in fact, if he weren't, you should be worried, because it's perfectly obvious that the regular Democratic Party machinery is going to be supporting him as the more moderate representative, and he's going to be right out there, and so that the rest of the people need to figure out how they can critique someone who is making proposals that are not adequately progressive to actually solve the problems, as distinct from just potentially more effectively addressing them. But somebody that is going to actually propose solutions to these things. And so it gives them an opportunity to talk about this inside the Democratic Party electorate out on the hustings, you know, without having to just savage, you know, Trump all day long, you know, because that'll wear thin over the next, you know, 18 months or so. You know, even though the hearings that are going to be going on in Congress, whether they're under the auspices of impeachment or just let's get more information, that's going to be doing a lot of that work on Trump and his people. What we have to learn, what we have to see here is whether or not the progressive community among our citizens is in fact mature enough to govern. Not just to critique, not just to criticize, not just to condemn, not just to throw up one particular policy, you know, and then flag that to death, you know, but to have an entire panoply of rules and regulations and laws that they're willing to stand by in some collective manner so that they share power. That's the opportunity that we have here.
What about some of these like pretty difficult to solve problems, like the crisis on the border? Like, do you think that like Trump is going to be able to weaponize that more so, and say like they don't have any solutions? Because at the end of the day, solutions to this kind of mass migration we're seeing are incredibly complex, and who's to say if there even are any?
So the question that you're really raising is the progressive community capable of solving these complex problems? I believe it's not sufficient to simply say that they're at least as capable as the reactionaries, but that's no answer. The question is whether they're really capable of doing this, you know, and that what we've got to do is we've been through this. The boomers have been through this, you know, that you've got to get over your adolescence. You know, our baby boom generation has had the most protracted adolescence of any generation in the history of the world. You know, I mean, we're all still smoking dope and getting laid and partying, you know, while the world burns around a lot of too many people. Not, I mean, present company excluded, and the rest of the boomers here who are all solid, upstanding citizens. But the bottom line is, the question is whether or not we're going to step up and realize this opportunity to actually solve these problems. And the real challenge is that it may be true that that requires compromise. And it's one of the things that the progressive community and our baby boom generation has been want to do. Is that, oh, you know, I'm not going to get into, you know, compromising. You know, this is the clear right thing to do. This is the principled thing to do. And why should I compromise with you, you craven capitalist of some sort? You know, and so the question is whether or not it's going to be necessary to compromise. If it is, how are we going to learn the skills to compromise in a way that isn't fatal to the principle that you're attempting to maintain here? And how do we organize ourselves to collectively compromise like that without having someone to your left you know, drive a dagger into your back, right, for you, you know, being some running lapdog of capitalism, you know, and so that we've got to be able to take this opportunity. We're going to have about 18 months here to do this, you know, that we have to be able to take this opportunity to step up, learn how to responsibly dialogue with each other, learn how to trust each other, learn how to conduct yourself so you merit trust. Okay? And a lot of this has to be done by your generation. I mean, you guys, the millennials, have to participate in this. And I think that you're going to have to participate in it in ways that are at least supplemental to the extinction revolt that's going on. You know, the Extinction Rebellion is a very specific partner in this whole process, but one has to be able to do more than figure out how to seize a bridge, you know, or sit down in the middle of traffic. That's getting attention, but then once you got people's attention, you have to propose something, you know, constructive and remedial. Am I going over time?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out one additional opportunity / crisis that we kind of glossed over, I think. But if Trump does in fact get impeached in one of the articles, or you know, the main article of impeachment is based on his climate change policies or their lack thereof, that sets the precedent for any future president that environmental policy protection is a critical role of the president, which is not something that is done, right? It's not something that
Providing for the common defense, you know, protecting the general welfare.
reestablishes the legitimacy of science that the industry has worked for literally decades, spent billions of dollars to undermine, and Trump was kind of the capstone. If we take off that, then that whole system will collapse, and we can actually have possibly an environmentally sustainable society.
Okay, so now look, what I want to do is I want you guys to start talking to me now about particular, like if there were, of all the stuff we've talked about up to this point, we're approaching sort of the halfway mark in the course of the most salient questions that exist in your own mind. I mean, other than who are the people that are part of this intertrust group, which is a big burning question. But I want you to reflect upon these questions, because I want to talk about next Tuesday, I want to talk about, you know, what it is that you want to write about, that you want to write about. I'm not trying to make you write about particular anything. I want you to think over the weekend. I want you to think about what you really want to write about. It's not to say that none of the three potential things that we put out right at the beginning aren't good candidates, but I would like to have 33 different papers. You know, not everybody writing about what's the role of the media in, you know, in not educating people adequately on global climate change. Not that you didn't have sterling papers on that, but I want you each to think about what it is you want to answer, what you want to do research on, and not just, you know, just look at the notes of things that we have said already. Because what I'm trying to do is put out a whole bunch of particular information to you simply to get you to work from that point forward. You know, to think about what it is that you want to look into to be able to start this process of doing some real contribution to your generation and to the whole human family to deal with these issues that are a mix of constitutional crisis and environmental crisis. Okay? So let's do that. Let's do that next Tuesday. We will come with a particular issue you want to write about, and we'll talk about it. And we want to do it all among ourselves so that it can help trigger ideas that other folks might have similar to that. Okay?